conceptual correlation that is pictured so often in the textbooks that is useless as proof of evolution. It's circular logic, which is not useful as proof. It is useful, though, I believe, as a model. Now, what in science, a model is, we understand, the beginning presupposition. Here's an idea. Now, the fact that you illustrate the idea is not proof. But the illustration will serve as a means of testing. And I think that's what the geologic column is useful for. We can test that against the real world to see if the facts fit. And how would you test it? Well, let's allow the evolutionist to describe how this test should proceed. Stephen Stanley of Johns Hopkins refers to topsy-turvy fossils. This would test it, he says. This would disprove evolution. Any topsy-turvy sequence of fossils would force us to rethink our theory. We'll look at a more complete rendition of that quote before we're finished. And by the way, the quotes that we're using are all in a handout that will be available for you, that is here. To illustrate, there are animals that are supposed to be at the bottom of the geologic column that may be found up. That would be a topsy-turvy fossil. Well, animals that are supposed to be down near the bottom early in the development are often found at the top. They're what we call living fossils, and so they really don't like to talk about this part of it that much. Niles Eldridge, a cohort of Stephen Gould, curator of invertebrate paleontology at the American Museum of Natural History, says there seems to have been almost no change in any part we can compare. These animals that began back at the bottom of the column, still alive today, and there's not been any change. He says we've not completely solved the riddle of living fossils. They should have evolved, and they shouldn't be alive. They should have been replaced. And he gives a number of illustrations. For example, the horseshoe crab. Now, you see the fossil inset down at the bottom. That's supposed to be 424 million years old. And here's the modern one up near the top, and that's just almost identical. And it would look more identical if we had more dark in here, but anyway, you can see fairly well. They're all over the place, millions of them. That's a topsy-turvy fossil. Keith Thompson, president of the Academy of Natural Sciences, says the horseshoe crabs of today look, of the fossil record, look quite like the modern forms. The last fossils became extinct 50 million years ago. Well, of course, fossils don't become extinct, but I understand what he's talking about. 50 million years, and you've got no fossils. But they're all over the place. Now, that doesn't fit their explanation, because when they quit making fossils, then they're supposed to be extinct, right? Not the way it works. Maybe the most famous living fossil is the coelacanth. This is a fossil fish that lived with the dinosaurs. Here we see Keith Thompson again writing a book about this. He says this is a fish thought to be extinct for 70 million years. A fish, coelacanth, an animal that thrived concurrently with the dinosaurs. And they look quite like modern forms. Yes, we have found them. They're alive. He says, though, we have no coelacanths younger than the late Cretaceous. Now, the late Cretaceous is as late as we find the dinosaurs. We find some above that, which they don't talk about, but not a whole lot. And so they went extinct same time, basically, the dinosaurs did. And no fossils for 65 million years. And now then we found over 600 of them swimming around in the ocean now. There's something a little fishy about that, isn't there? Here's a news account of a fossil that was found alive in Sydney, Australia, several years ago. David Noble went out on a holiday hike, stepped off the beaten path into the prehistoric age, standing amid trees thought to have disappeared 150 million years ago. Here's a Jurassic Park tree that's been gone since Jurassic Park. The discovery is the equivalent of finding a small dinosaur still alive on the earth, said Carrick Chambers, director of the Royal Botanical Gardens. One of the most dramatic and significant living fossils are graptolites, which everybody knows about, right? Anybody ever heard of a graptolite? Well, if you were a petroleum geologist, you would know all about them. These are very important. These are index fossils, and these particular graptolites are index fossils of the Cambrian. That's the bottom layer in the geologic column. And an index fossil is a fossil that allows you to say, that's a Cambrian graptolite. Therefore, I know this is a Cambrian rock. That dates the rock as Cambrian because it only lived during this period, died out, and went extinct, except now then they have found them alive, this index fossil of the lowest layer. Quoting from Nature, again of several years ago, this is not new knowledge, and you'll never see it in the textbook. All paleontologists dream of finding a living fossil. Noel Dilly seems to have done so. Graptolites are arguably the most important zone fossil of the lower Paleozoic. This is far from an esoteric issue. Supposed to be gone, hundreds of millions of years, still alive. Well, what this does, obviously, is falsify the idea that if you don't find it above a certain point in the geologic record, it went extinct. Now, just over and over again, we've proved that that's not so, and yet they still say that, no matter how many examples you find. These are topsy-turvy fossils, the ones that are supposed to be up that are found down. That does falsify the extinction hypothesis. But there's so many of them, they've kind of gotten immune to that. And they say, wait a minute, that's not what you need to find. What you need to find is things that are supposed to be the other way around. Things that are supposed to be up that are found down. Now, maybe you can have things living on the razor edge of extinction for 70 million years and no fossils after having a bunch of them for a long time, and then still be alive. That's incredible, but they can imagine that. But how in the world can you take something that didn't develop till hundreds of millions of years later and get it back down at the bottom? Now, that would just rip it, wouldn't it? And they acknowledge that, that's not going to work. Richard Dawkins of Oxford, one of the most vicious anti-creationists in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, says we should be very surprised, for example, to find fossil humans appearing in the record before mammals are supposed to have evolved. If a single well-verified mammal skull were to turn up in 500 million-year-old rocks, our whole modern theory of evolution would be utterly destroyed. Things supposed to be up, found down. Now, I think the logic is virtually the same going the other way, but coming this way, they just give up at this point. Now, that sounds like a very scientific way to proceed. Here's a test, and science proceeds by such test, and they're verified or falsified. But it's not quite as simple as you think, because we found this kind of thing all over the place.